He had no voice left to scream. Only the wind heard him. Bound in chains, left to freeze beneath a canopy of silent pines, Ranger Ellis Monroe was forgotten by the world, but not by all of it. Through the snow came a creature no one would have believed, a wolf walking not with hunger, but with purpose. In that moment, man and beast didn't see a stranger. They saw a soul worth saving. And sometimes, salvation comes, wrapped in fur, with eyes that remember pain and choose mercy. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. In the frozen wilds just outside Juneau, Alaska, the forest didn't speak. It remembered. It remembered every footprint that vanished under fresh snowfall, every broken twig snapped in silence, every secret buried beneath a canopy of whispering pines. In the heart of that memory, something had gone terribly wrong. A storm had swallowed the peaks the night before, thick with snow so heavy it broke branches as it fell. Visibility dropped to inches. Wind shrieked like a warning too late to matter. The patrol teams, experienced as they were, had called off all movement. But Ellis Monroe had already gone ahead. Ellis 41 was the chief ranger of the Tongass sector. A man of few words and steady hands, he wore his duty like a second skin. He had slate-gray eyes that rarely blinked, and a beard more salt than pepper. People described him the way they might a mountain solid, silent and unforgiving when tested. He'd served the forests of Alaska for over 2 decades, and the forest had grown to trust him. But not everyone did. 2 days ago, Ellis left to investigate illegal timber activity in Sector 9, an area closed for conservation, but coveted by private contractors. He never returned. Most thought he'd gotten lost. Some whispered he ran. But the truth lay deeper in the woods, chained to an ancient Sitka spruce, with the blood on his shirt frozen solid, and his breath coming in shallow clouds. He had been ambushed, not by nature but by men. Their faces were covered, their voices low, demanding access to the protected zone. Ellis had refused, so they made him disappear, left to die, where no trail reached and no signal could carry. Now, 2 days later, his lips were blue, his fingers swollen and bloodless wrists blistered, where cold iron met torn skin. He no longer knew if it was day or night. The storm had blurred time, space, even thought. His body sagged against the tree, yet his mind clung to one stubborn truth. This forest was his, and it wouldn't let him go so easily. Through the blind fog and falling snow, something moved. It was quiet. So quiet, Ellis thought he imagined it at first. A breath, a crunch, then 2 golden eyes in the white. They didn't blink. They didn't shine with malice. They simply watched. The figure stepped forward. A wolf, but not like any Ellis had seen before. Its fur was ash gray, mottled with darker streaks near the neck and spine thick against the cold. Scars marked its hind leg where traps had once clamped tight. One ear was torn, and around its neck, beneath the thick coat, Ellis glimpsed something strange, a faint worn patch where a collar might have once been. This wolf had known humans and left them behind. The people in the outskirts of Juneau called it Shadow, a ghost of the snow line, a wanderer. They said it appeared on stormy nights, watching cabins from a distance, but never crossing into towns. Farmers swore it wasn't afraid of firelight. Hunters claimed it had once followed them for miles without a sound. Some said it had belonged to a veteran who'd passed years ago. Others believed it had never belonged to anyone. But all agreed on one thing: Shadow was not like the others. Now that same wolf stood in front of Ellis. Not growling, not baring teeth, just sitting. Its breath steamed in the air, its gaze never wavered. For a moment, Ellis forgot the pain. He forgot the cold. There was something in those eyes, not hunger, not fear, understanding. Ellis tried to speak. His lips cracked. No sound came. But his eyes did not leave the wolf. Shadow moved closer. It was absurd. Wolves didn't do this. Not in storms, not with men, not like this. The creature sniffed the air near Ellis's chest. It moved carefully, paws crunching in the snow, circling him once, then again. Then it stopped at the chain, locking Ellis's torso to the tree. It growled not at Ellis, but at the chain itself. A low, guttural sound, almost offended. Then it lifted its head and howled. The sound cut through the trees, slicing into the blizzard like a blade. It wasn't loud, but it carried. Deep. Echoing. Purposeful. Shadow looked back at Ellis once more, then turned and vanished into the storm. Ellis, delirious, thought perhaps he'd seen a ghost. Perhaps death had sent a companion. He closed his eyes, but Shadow was real. That same night, miles away, a young ranger named Clara Whitmore leaned over a distorted radio signal in Base Camp West. Clara, 29, was new to the Tongass Division, determined, intuitive, and fiercely protective of wildlife. She had olive skin, a braid always tucked under her winter beanie, and a notebook filled with hand-drawn maps of wolf migration patterns. Most dismissed her ideas, but she noticed what others didn't. That night she caught something unusual, a flare in the radio's static pulse, something like a howl, but too deliberate to be random noise. She grabbed her gear and snowshoes. Alone. No one followed. No one believed. But Clara had seen Shadow once before. Not up close, but she remembered the way the animal had stood still while her flashlight passed over its eyes. That gaze. That defiance. She followed instinct and found the trail. Scattered tracks weaving into the woods, circling twice near the boundary of Sector 9, then disappearing. For 5 hours she hiked until the trees thinned and the silence shifted. That's when she saw him. A shadow slumped against a spruce, barely moving, and a second shadow watching from the ridge above. Ellis was alive. Clara rushed forward, calling for backup through the satellite unit. She wrapped Ellis in thermal layers, checked his pulse, and began the slow process of reviving his body, while Shadow never moved. He didn't run. He didn't leave. He stayed until the other rangers arrived, and even then he followed. At a distance, not vanishing into the forest like a wild animal, but walking along the snow trail, as if he were part of the rescue, as if he had called them. The ranger station on the outskirts of Juneau stirred long before dawn. A faint orange glow simmered beneath the horizon, barely warming the frost that clung to the windows. Inside, the air was thick with tension, steam from mugs of bitter black coffee boots, scraping against wood floors, and radios hissing with fragmented transmissions. The storm hadn't passed. It had only paused. Clara Whitmore sat by the medical cot, where Ellis Monroe lay wrapped in heated blankets, his skin still pale, but no longer blue. His breathing was stable now, shallow but rhythmic. Machines beeped softly, but it was the silence between the beeps that unsettled Clara the most. Clara's features were drawn, her cheeks wind-burned from the hours in the cold. Her jacket still smelled of smoke and pine. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. Not when her instincts, the same ones that led her through miles of white silence, kept tugging at her chest like a fishing line caught in something deeper. She looked out the window, and there he was, Shadow. The wolf sat in the snow just beyond the circle of lantern light, motionless but alert. His scarred leg tucked beneath him, his amber eyes fixed on the station door. Like a sentinel, like he was waiting for permission to enter a world he no longer belonged to. Behind Clara, footsteps approached, slow, heavy, deliberate. Sheriff Calden Riggs entered the infirmary. A stocky man in his late 50s, Calden had once worked with Ellis on backcountry wildfire detail. His beard was more beard than face, his eyebrows like snow-dusted pine branches. He carried his age the way a mountain carried snowfall, quiet, weighted, and always watching for signs of an avalanche. "Clara," he said in a low voice, nodding toward Ellis. "How's he holding up?" "Alive," she replied. "Barely." Calden scratched his chin. "You're the one that found him." Clara nodded. "And the wolf." Clara hesitated. "He found Ellis first. Then me. I followed him to the tree." Calden raised a brow. "You saying the wolf led you there?" "I'm saying I wouldn't have found him without that animal." Calden didn't argue. He simply stepped closer to the bed and looked down at his old friend. "That man's got more lives than a fox in hunting season." Ellis stirred. His head moved slightly against the pillow. His lips parted, barely audible. "Wolf," Clara leaned in. "You're safe. We got you out." But Ellis wasn't listening. His mind was still trapped in the woods somewhere between pain and frost. Meanwhile, Shadow didn't move. He remained rooted in the snow, as if the act of leaving might undo everything he had just repaired. "Let him in," Clara said suddenly. Calden looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "It's a wild animal." "He's not wild," she whispered. "Not anymore." They opened the back door gently. Shadow stepped in without hesitation. Not with fear. Not even with curiosity. He walked with purpose, stopping at Ellis's bedside, sniffing the air, and then sitting at the foot of the cot, like a soldier awaiting orders. The station grew quiet. The beeping, the whispering, the snow outside, it all faded. And Ellis, half-conscious, exhaled deeply, as if something inside him recognized the presence and allowed his body to let go of its fight. In another room, Ranger Milo Darnell watched the scene unfold from behind the safety of a glass partition. Milo, 34, was sharp skeptical and carried the energy of someone who'd lived too many lives in too few years. A former wildlife tracker turned ranger, he had scars on his hands from snares he once dismantled and tattoos running up his arms of animals he'd failed to save. He turned to Rachel Lennox, the station's administrative coordinator and Ellis's longtime friend. Rachel, 45, precise and perceptive, had strawberry blonde curls always tied in a tight bun, and a tone that brokered no nonsense. She handled reports with the efficiency of a federal agent, and memories like trapwire. She never forgot a name, a number, or a face. "You believe this?" Milo asked. "A wolf walks a half-dead ranger out of a snowstorm." Rachel didn't answer at first. She kept watching, then said, "I believe what I see." In the hours that followed, word spread. Rangers from other stations called in. A few local reporters tried to push through, drawn by whispers of the so-called ghost wolf of Juneau. But none were allowed in. Ellis remained unconscious but stable. Clara began assembling the facts, trying to piece together what had happened in Sector 9. And Shadow never slept. He stood guard by the door, walked the hallway at night, huffed at strange noises. When someone approached Ellis too quickly, he stiffened. When Clara spoke to Ellis, he sat calmly nearby. He seemed to know who belonged and who didn't. Late into the second night, Clara returned to the infirmary to find Rachel sitting with a folder open on her lap. "What's that?" "Personnel records," Rachel said without looking up, trying to see who last logged a patrol in Sector 9. "Isn't that area closed?" Rachel met her gaze. "Exactly." In the logs, one name stood out. Mason Harlan, a seasonal contractor assigned to wildlife camera maintenance. But Ellis had never signed off on that assignment. "That signature's not his," Rachel said, pointing at the authorization form. "He always crosses his T's like a triangle." Clara narrowed her eyes. "You think it was forged?" "I think someone wanted him out of the way." Just then, Shadow growled low, his body tensed. Clara turned. A figure stood in the hallway watching. Mason Harlan. Late 20s, lean build, sunken eyes, and a hat pulled too far over his brow. He carried a clipboard, but something about him was off. Clara stood. "Mason, what are you doing here?" "I heard Ellis was back," he said. "Just wanted to check in." Rachel stood too. "You were never supposed to be in Sector 9. Mason smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I just follow orders." Shadow stepped between them, low, unmoving, and Mason turned and walked away. But Clara felt something heavy settle in her gut. The storm hadn't passed. It had simply changed shape. The morning after Mason Harlan's unexpected visit, Juneau's wind carried an unease that no blanket of snow could bury. Clouds hung low over the treetops, heavy with something more than weather. Inside the ranger station, tension crackled in the wires and walls. And somewhere within that pressure, someone was hiding a lie. Ellis Monroe, though still weak, had regained consciousness enough to sit upright. His bruises were healing, but his voice came in whispers, like every word cost more than he could afford. Clara Whitmore remained by his side, a silent shield and a listening ear. She brought him black coffee just the way he used to drink it before Sector 9 became a grave in waiting. "Ellis," she said gently, "we need to know what happened out there." His eyes met hers. They were tired, but sharp like flint buried in ash. "They knew where I'd be," he rasped. "The ones who took me. They weren't amateurs. They had maps, schedules, coordinates. You think someone fed them information?" He nodded slowly. "Not just someone on the inside." That single phrase dropped into the room like a stone into ice water. Clara stood, pulse quickening. "You have someone in mind." Ellis hesitated as if saying the name itself might summon the devil. Devin Croft. Devin had once been Ellis's right hand. Now he was Deputy Director of External Operations, a polished man in his early 40s, with a perfectly trimmed beard and an ambition that never blinked. Devin spoke in careful cadence, wore expensive boots into the field, and believed that the future of Alaska's forestry lay in strategic partnerships, code for opening doors to contractors no one trusted. Years ago, Ellis had blocked a proposal by Devin to expand patrol roads into Sector 9, claiming environmental impact. Devin never forgave him. That decision had been the first wedge. Now Ellis suspected it was also the spark. Clara moved quickly, meeting Rachel Lennox in the station's secure records room. Rachel was already holding a folder. "I ran the signature from the Sector 9 patrol clearance," Rachel said without waiting. "Compared it to every form Ellis has filed in the past 2 years. It's not his handwriting." "Then whose is it?" Rachel opened the second folder. "Devin Croft. The strokes match his application for district expansion 6 months ago. Same loop on the R, same angled tail on the F." Clara's stomach tightened. He forged Ellis's name. "That's not all," Rachel added, pulling up a surveillance feed. "We found footage gaps, 4 hours missing from the West compound cameras 3 nights ago. Someone wiped the logs." Behind them, Shadow walked the hallway in silence. His claws made the faintest tapping sound on the hardwood, but it wasn't noise, it was rhythm. He had made the station his territory now. Each room a post, each door a threshold only he chose to cross. Clara glanced at the wolf. "He hasn't slept." Rachel crossed her arms. "He senses something we don't." Later that afternoon, Devin Croft arrived. He pulled into the lot in a sleek, black SUV that didn't match the muddy snow of backcountry Juneau. He wore a camel-colored coat, pristine leather gloves, and that familiar, practiced smile. Clara met him at the door. "Clara," he said. Warm, but wary. "I heard Ellis was back. Is he well?" "He's recovering," she said. "And remembering things." Devin tilted his head, such as, like who might have signed a fake permit under his name. The smile flickered. "You should be careful with accusations like that. We have handwriting matches, gaps in security logs, unauthorized movement near Sector 9. Why would someone go to such lengths if they had nothing to hide?" Devin's voice dropped. "You think this is about me?" Clara didn't answer. Shadow appeared in the doorway. The wolf's presence changed the air. He didn't growl. He simply stared, as if measuring Devin not as a threat, but as a question that needed answering. Devin took a step back. "Still keeping pets here, I see." "He's not a pet," Clara said. "He's a survivor, same as Ellis." Inside the station, Ellis watched the conversation from a side window. His breath clouded the glass. Though his body remained fragile, his mind sharpened with every passing hour. That evening, Sheriff Calden Riggs called for a closed-door meeting in the main briefing room. Present were Clara Rachel Milo Darnell and 2 senior patrol rangers. Seth Rowley, 52, dependable and detail-driven head of operations at the West Ridge Outpost. Nina Holt, 38. No-nonsense former Army medic turned field ranger known for her precision and refusal to tolerate red tape. The group reviewed the forged permit, the missing camera data, and the implications of an internal leak. "We're looking at coordinated sabotage," Nina said, "and whoever's behind it had access to real-time patrol routes." Seth folded his arms. "You're talking about someone in Central Command." Rachel laid the documents on the table. "The only person with both the clearance and the motive is Devin Croft." "And what about Mason Harlan?" Milo asked. "He's not just a contractor." "I checked his background. 5 years ago, he was dishonorably discharged from a security detail in Oregon for tampering with environmental monitors." Clara looked to Calden. "He's working for Devin." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Then we're not just dealing with corruption. We're dealing with conspiracy." Outside, the storm returned. Snow fell in long, slanting sheets, and the wind carried the howl of something ancient. Ellis, resting now but not asleep, turned his face toward the sound. Shadow was gone. Just like that. No tracks. No warning. But Ellis didn't panic. He whispered, "He's hunting." The storm had fallen quiet, but inside the ranger station a deeper cold had settled. It wasn't in the air. It was in the silence between breaths, in the way people glanced over their shoulders, in the knowledge that danger hadn't left. Only learned how to knock softer. It started with the lights. At 2:17 a.m., every bulb in the main building blinked once, twice, then died. Emergency backup failed to engage. The hum of electricity, so constant it had gone unnoticed for days, vanished, replaced by a silence so unnatural it made even seasoned rangers hold their breath. Ellis Monroe was awake before the power cut. The storm outside whispered against the windows, and his healing ribs still ached with each breath. But it wasn't pain that woke him. It was instinct. That primal, ancient alertness the forest had taught him to trust. From his cot in the infirmary, he sat up slowly. Something was wrong. Across the station, Clara Whitmore had fallen asleep at her desk. She jerked upright when the lights vanished. Her hand shot to her flashlight. A second later, she heard it, a faint metallic clink. Not mechanical. Not accidental. Chains. Footsteps. Shadow had vanished the night before. But now, as if summoned by something more than memory, he returned, emerging from the rear hallway, his gray coat damp with melting frost. His eyes locked on the back exit. Then he growled, a deep guttural warning, not for attention but for action. Clara was already moving. She woke Ellis, grabbed her service weapon, and keyed her radio. Dead. No signal. Rachel Lennox met her in the corridor moments later, holding a flare instead of a flashlight. Rachel's face was grim. North fence tripped. Ellis, standing despite the pain, nodded. They're here. In the shadows beyond the loading bay, the first figure moved. Fast. Silent. Armed. The intruder burst through the rear door, dressed in snow camouflage face, hidden beneath a black ski mask. Clara raised her gun, but before she could fire, Shadow lunged. The wolf collided with the attacker mid-run, sending them both tumbling across the hall. A gunshot cracked, sharp and sudden. Shadow yelped, then pushed forward again, teeth finding fabric and flesh. Clara fired once, warning. The attacker retreated. Ellis limped forward and pulled Shadow back, his hand slick with blood not his own. The wolf's shoulder was grazed, muscle torn but not broken. Shadow staggered, but his eyes burned brighter. He didn't stop. Clara gave chase, boots pounding through the corridor, her breath fogging the air. The intruder fled through the east wing, dodging between crates and racks of supplies. At the far door, another figure appeared. Mason Howie. Late 20s. Average height. Wiry-billed eyes always flicking like he was expecting Shadows to talk back. Mason had once been charming a contractor with a smirk, but now that charm had cracked into desperation. He raised his weapon. Clara didn't hesitate. She fired. The bullet tore through his thigh, and he collapsed with a strangled curse. Blood soaked the snow beneath him. Clara kicked the weapon away and cuffed him with zip ties. Ellis caught up, leaning heavily on the wall, Shadow trailing behind him, limping but unyielding. "It's over," Clara said, breathless. Mason grinned through gritted teeth. "You really think I'm the only one?" Back at the station, Rachel had traced the emergency breach to a relay switch in the garage, manually shut down. She reconnected the lines and restored partial power. Sheriff Calden Riggs arrived an hour later, storming in with deputies in tow. The wounded intruder Shadow had tackled was found unconscious in the supply closet, disarmed and bleeding from a deep bite wound to the forearm. Rachel handed Calden a file marked, highlighted, cross-referenced. Everything ties back to Devon Croft. Forged permits, unauthorized funding transfers, false maintenance logs. Calden didn't hesitate. By 6:40 a.m., Devon Croft was in custody. They found him at his Juneau townhouse. Bags half-packed, phone erased. His boots were clean, but his conscience wasn't. The world learned about the wolf before noon. Shadow's story, how a lone animal helped rescue a forest ranger, fought off an armed assailant, and stood guard over the wounded, spread faster than the storm could cover it. A photo of Shadow sitting beside Ellis at the station door, head raised and ears sharp, went viral. News vans appeared at the outer perimeter by evening. Reporters wanted interviews. Biologists called in. Offers came from sanctuaries and national wildlife campaigns. But Ellis spoke clearly. "He's not a symbol," he said. "He's my partner." Clara supported the decision. Ellis filed paperwork to adopt Shadow, not as a pet, but as a working partner under special status. Shadow would remain wild, but registered as part of Echo Patrol under Ellis's personal care. At the same time, Shadow was taken to the veterinary center in Anchorage for treatment. Dr. Madeline Rhodes, the center's lead specialist, examined the wound. A woman in her early 50s with silver hair, and the patience of someone who'd seen more animal suffering than most could bear. She treated Shadow with gentle hands and respectful silence. "He's lucky," she said. "The bullet missed the bone. With time, he'll recover." Ellis sat beside him during treatment, never leaving his side. Even sedated Shadow's body remained alert, ears twitching, nose flicking. When he woke, he looked straight at Ellis. No growl, no fear, just recognition. Spring came late to Juneau that year. The snow didn't melt. It receded like a reluctant tide. Buds trembled on black spruce branches. The wind still whispered cold, but the scent of thawing earth mingled with something older, something watchful. And while the forest began to breathe again, so did the men and women who swore to protect it. Ellis Monroe stood at the edge of Sector 12, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes tracing the tree line like it might reveal a secret. It had been weeks since the night Shadow was shot. Weeks since Devon Croft was arrested. But something in Ellis's bones told him it wasn't over. Behind him, Clara Whitmore approached clipboard, under her arm sunglasses, hiding the bruise just below her right eye, a souvenir from a scuffle during Mason Howie's transfer to state custody. "We got word from HQ this morning," she said. "They still want you to take the desk job in Seattle." Ellis didn't move. "And you? I told them you said no." His mouth curled slightly. "Good." Clara handed him a manila folder. "It's official now. Echo Response Unit is cleared for operation. You're listed as field commander. I'm co-director. And Shadow, he's got his own badge. Sort of." They both smiled. Shadow lay in the grass just behind them, his gray coat catching the light. His shoulder had healed the scar hidden beneath thick fur. But he moved more carefully now, every step measured. Not weakened, just wiser. He still refused to sleep indoors, still preferred the open cold. And every night he would walk the fence line, pause at the corners, ears twitching toward the dark. Juneau had turned him into a symbol, the wolf who saved the forest ranger. But Shadow seemed unaffected by the fame. Tourists tried to catch glimpses. Biologists asked for DNA. Local children sent drawings. Shadow ignored it all. His gaze only followed one thing: Ellis. Later that week, Echo Unit began their first full patrol operation. Alongside Clara and Ellis were 3 newly reassigned officers. Noah Reyes, 36, tactical specialist, soft-spoken but strategic. A former smoke jumper, he moved like a shadow through terrain and spoke with a calm that made others listen. Aubrey Vance, 31, communications expert, sharp-witted and bold. Once part of a wildfire forecasting team, she had a knack for catching patterns in static most missed. Tom Kendrick, 40, logistics and survivalist ex-military, carried old injuries and old regrets, but could build a camp blindfolded with a tin knife and dry pine bark. The team was lean, well-vetted, and trusted. Every member had read the Croft files. Every member had something to prove. That's why Ellis didn't hesitate when the first anomaly appeared. A static pulse across the comms, just a brief flicker during routine channel checks. Aubrey traced it to an old repeater station near Fox Hollow Ridge, long thought disabled after a fire 10 years ago. Signals bouncing back from something she said. Either an unlisted relay or someone's reactivated the grid. They went out that afternoon. The old patrol road had collapsed into the creek over the years, so they went on foot. Ellis led the front shadow at his side, the wolf's head lowered slightly, nostrils flaring. The repeater station was a crumbling shack, overgrown with moss and nettles. But the door had been forced open recently. Inside, old wires hung from rusted panels. A makeshift power source, a car battery, and solar array hummed low. Somebody rigged this to listen, Aubrey muttered. This isn't forest tech. It's military grade. Shadow suddenly growled. He backed up, tail straight, body stiff. Noah checked the ground. Tripwire. Tom spotted it a second later. He traced the wire to a buried panel just behind the threshold. Claymore-style charge, he muttered. Not set to kill, set to warn. Ellis stared at the cabin walls, the silent trigger mechanism, the strange care with which it had been hidden. This was recent, he said. Whoever built this didn't leave. They're watching. That night, Ellis couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from recognition. The silence that followed a storm was never peace. It was waiting. Shadow didn't sleep either. At midnight, Clara heard something. She stepped onto the porch of the station's barracks and paused. The wind was still. But she heard it barely. Chains, distant, soft. She moved to the perimeter. There, just at the tree line, Shadow stood facing the dark. His hackles raised. He didn't bark. He growled. The next day, Ellis and Shadow returned to a forgotten guard post near the southern basin, an outpost abandoned after a landslide had wiped out the fire trail a decade ago. The doors were sealed with wire, but there were fresh boot prints in the mud. Inside they found crates, fuel cells, land survey maps, satellite overlays. But more than that, they found blueprints stamped with private contractor insignia. Ellis flipped through the pages. The logo matched one of Devon Croft's former clients. He looked at Shadow, who sat in the doorway, ears sharp. They're still here, Ellis whispered. They never left. In the heart of the forest, a wolf reminded us of something we often forget. Loyalty is not measured by words, but by presence. When the world went silent, Shadow stayed. When danger returned, he stood between it and the people he chose to protect. We all have storms in our lives. We all face moments where we feel chained, isolated, or forgotten. But sometimes, help doesn't arrive with noise. It comes quietly through instinct, through trust, through those who never walk away when things grow dark. In a world that moves too fast, this story asks us to slow down, to listen, to notice those who stand with us in silence. So if this story stirred something in you, share it. Let someone else feel it too. Leave a comment. Tell us what loyalty means to you. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe. There's more waiting in the wild.